Welcome to the Herd and 10. I am your host, Jake Fertinsky, joined by my brother, Kevin Fertinsky. I'm happy that we got a win this week, but certainly concerned. The title of this week's episode, and this is really what it's all about. This is what we're going to talk about this week, deciphering the Buffalo Bills. It's a really tricky situation here because I don't know what the Buffalo Bills are. I feel like after the Jets game, you and I talked about that, it was week one. You burn the tapes, you move on. They go and put together a slew of great games, and then they play not their greatest game against the Jaguars in London, and we can kind of excuse that due to travel. But then they go and put up another stinker against who is now arguably the worst team in the NFL, the New York Giants. We did get the win, and in the end, none of it should matter. But I feel like there's a pattern beginning here. And I I, I got a photo for anyone who's watching live. You're gonna see a photo here. And then this is what I see the Bills as. They are an enigma. They are very hard to understand. I just don't know what this team is. I don't know if they are truly a Super Bowl contender. Are they a pretender? Are they a playoff team? Are they not? I, I feel like I'm in this cycle where it's just a roller coaster. It's a true roller coaster ride. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the Bills are going through some serious injuries. Okay, we knew that the defense was not going to be the same without Tre'Davious White, Matt Milano, Daquan Jones, Dane Jackson, who I don't even like, but he's still a guy that you're missing. You're really thin. Cam Lewis went down. I mean, the list goes on. The Buffalo Bills are very injury plagued right now. You have Von Miller, who's clearly still not ready to go. They're obviously easing him into it. It does drive me crazy they don't play him more, but I also understand they're trying to protect him. But I look at the Bills defense and I go, this is a big, big problem. And we talked about this last week that they need to fix it. They haven't yet. I just don't know if it is fixable with the cap and the guys that are going to be available. I don't see this as we're missing one piece. I think we're missing two, three, four pieces for this defense to be back to where they need to be. And on the other side of the ball, you have an offense who should be amazing, should be potent, but struggled against Wink Martindale's scheme. Because I have to mention Wink Martindale because, you know, NBC couldn't get enough of him. He's the greatest defensive coordinator to ever coach, apparently. So, Kev, walk me through this. Like, am I missing something? Are we just? Are you as mixed up as I am as to what the Buffalo Bills are and what they're gonna be?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard to know at this point of the season. We haven't played very many good teams, in my opinion. I mean, we played the Dolphins, who are a good team, and we were able to shut them down and put up a lot of points. We played Jacksonville, who's decent, and we didn't look very good. Obviously, this past week was a mess against one of the worst teams in the league, and I think we have more questions than answers at this point. We've had three very poor performances and three very good performances. What are we? I don't know. We come out half the games looking like we're amazing, and then the other half we look terrible. So it's really, really hard to know what's going on at this point. You did point out the travel. I am hoping that the last 2 weeks, last two games, have been because of the travel to London. Firstly, you traveled to London very late, got there 48 hours before the game. That didn't work at all. We looked completely asleep in the first half. And then we had to come back from London, and maybe that affected our practice week. We had some injuries. Maybe it affected our practice week. I am hoping that's the case. I really don't know. I didn't like the play calling from Ken Dorsey yesterday. I thought it was terrible. You're going against the second worst run defense in the league, and we barely ran at all in the first half. We kept throwing, and Allen basically wouldn't throw to anyone but Stephon Diggs in the first half. So there was no designed plays to anyone else. And it seemed when he did go to anyone else, like Dawson Knox, it ended with disastrous results. One ended in an interception, and then the final offensive play ended in a dropped ball by Dawson Knox. I will say it wasn't a perfect pass, but you would hope your so-called top 10 tight end in the league, as he's paid, would catch the ball. He had two hands on the ball. He's going to the ground, and he knocks it out of his own hands. I mean, catch the ball. So again, I don't think Allen got a lot of help. I don't think the O-line looked very good. It's unfortunate because for 3 straight games, our O-line, run game, offense as a whole looked unbelievable. We looked like the best team in the league for 3 games. Our offense and our defense, really. For 3 games, we looked like the best team in the league. And then the last 2 games, we looked like one of the worst teams in the league. So it's, like you said, it's been a real roller coaster. And who knows where we're going to be at the end of the season.
Let's talk a little bit about the offensive coordinator, because you brought this up, and I look at this offense, and I'm not going to say it's a pattern emerging, because this is not a pattern that's just emerging. It's a pattern that emerged a long time ago. It actually emerged and peaked its ugly head last year. Ken Dorsey's offense runs through Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs, and that's about it. That's a big problem. We know that we have a better run game this year. Why did we not run the ball in the first half? Even if it wasn't the Giants, we have a better run game. We have some good running backs this year. We have real talent. Our offensive line is protecting well for the run. They're getting good push. Why are we so heavily reliant on Stephon Diggs? Now, one answer, the simplest answer, is Stephon Diggs is a great player and he knows how to get open, and Josh is looking for him. The other answer, which is a little more negative, but I think closer to the reality, is the offense, and Ken Dorsey is not scheming things up to get other players open on a regular basis. Because I saw one play where they schemed open Khalil Shakir, and it went for almost 20 yards. I saw them scheme maybe one play they tried for Deontay Hardy. They schemed one play for Dawson Knox, which he dropped, but he was open. So when I look at that, I go, so you're telling me an entire game, maybe they schemed, and I think I would be nice in saying 5 plays that they were able to actually scheme guys open who weren't named Stephon Diggs. And I can't be the only person seeing this. I think other teams are seeing it and they're keying in on it. Sure, Diggs is going to get his 100 yards plus a game. Maybe he'll get a touchdown. But outside of that, that's not going to win you games. If the Bills played the way they played last night against almost every other team in the NFL, except for the Chicago Bears, they probably lose. That's very concerning to me. We are not in the first week. We're not in the second week. This wasn't like we were a road game. This was at home in prime time. There is a problem with the offensive coordinator. I'm saying it right now. I'm coming out. It's not a hot take. Ken Dorsey is not what we had thought and what we had hoped he would become. Now, it's not to say you're going to fire him this year and try to move things around midway through the season, but I do think you need to strongly consider your options for next year. I know we had issues with Brian Daboll. Of course, he's not coming back. He had imperfections too. And I'm not expecting perfection, but I don't expect to see a terrible pattern of lack of creativity. I feel like that's probably the best way to put it. I think there's been a lack of creativity. I think it's very predictable. And then there's one last piece that we need to talk about in terms of coaching. And maybe this falls on Sean McDermott. Kev, I know you were pretty enthusiastic last night about the last drive, the last offensive drive. The Bills chose to run the ball twice, right up the middle, no effort, not a draw play, not a screen, not a quick slant or a drag, nothing, not even a rollout for Josh to then maybe take off. You have Josh Allen. I feel like sometimes the coaching staff has to be reminded that they have Josh frickin' Allen. You don't have to run the ball up the middle to close out a game. You have Josh Allen. And it's just concerning to me that the coaching staff almost handcuffed him at the end of the game. I know they kind of gave him an opportunity, third down, but it was just very predictable. Right, Kev?
Yeah, I think it's the same issue we saw for large stretches of the season last year. I don't feel like our offense has an identity. It's been the same way for a very long time. We sort of just rely on Josh Allen to make a play. We just hope he's going to make a play. We don't actually scheme up proper plays. I mean, you watch other teams that have amazing offenses like Miami and San Francisco and the Eagles, and their offense is very unpredictable. They have amazing plays that they scheme up. And I find we only get those plays when Josh Allen makes something out of nothing. I don't see why we can't make those types of plays. I just don't see it enough on a regular basis. And I think those teams know what their offenses are. They have a great mix of running and throwing, and they stick to their game plans. I thought we came out last game without a game plan. I really don't know what the game plan was in the first half. We weren't running the ball, and we were basically just hoping Stephon Diggs was going to get open and throwing it to him. I was just in shock at that first half. It was completely unwatchable. The way we just had no plan of attack. I don't understand how we came into that game with no offensive game plan. I really don't. I feel like Ken Dorsey thought that the Giants were going to just let us score touchdowns. And he just went into it like an exhibition game where there was no game plan whatsoever. I just don't even know how to explain that first half. It's hard to deal with. It happened the week before in Jacksonville as well, where you're just perplexed as to what they came into the game with. Usually, they have a set of plays that they feel really confident in to start a game. And you look at our first 4 drives, we basically had 2 first downs or something like that. It was honestly embarrassing from what we thought is an upper echelon team, possibly one of the best, if not the best, offense in the league. And you don't seem to be using anyone properly. So it's a huge concern going forward.
And let's talk about their emotional state. We talked about this last season. I don't want to spend too much time on last season, but obviously with everything that had happened to DeMar Hamlin, the team clearly went through a lot, things that no team should have to go through, hopefully never has to go through. And we saw that linger into the playoffs. And then, of course, the Bills put up that horrific effort against the Cincinnati Bengals and they get pummeled. But that was one of those situations where we thought that they were just mentally drained. But then I see this year and I'm seeing some of those things peeking through again. We saw it against Jacksonville. We saw it against the Jets. And now we've seen it again against the Giants. And you mentioned it last night while we were watching the game that we were, I don't know at what point, this was probably in the third quarter. The Bills are struggling. At that point, they still have 0 points. And the camera cuts to Josh Allen on the bench. And you said it. He looks dejected. He looked like he had nothing left, like he gave it his all, and his all was clearly not enough. But where is that leadership? Where is that? Because it feels like we've been very reliant, not just on the field, but off the field with Stephon Diggs. There was all that complaining, bitching that Diggs is a diva and he's whining in the offseason, but he's the only guy that seems to be the heart and soul of this team. On the sidelines, he's the one pumping everyone up. And maybe that's his place and Josh doesn't want to overstep, but it's a little concerning. I like when I see some emotion and seeing Josh Allen sitting on the bench with his head down or looking up at the stars like he doesn't know what to do is a very concerning sign for a fan who believes that Josh Allen is the guy. Because are you the guy when you're doing that? It's not a great sign. That, I'm not saying Josh Allen isn't a great player. I'm not saying he's not elite. I'm not saying he isn't going to do great things for the Bills, but it makes you wonder at the back of your head, is he the guy that's going to take us to the promised land? Is he the guy that has that extra gear? And it makes me concerned that he might not be the guy. You don't see Patrick Mahomes doing that. You just don't. And it is a little concerning. Like, Kev, you feel the same way? Like, am I crazy in saying that? I mean, we know he's a great player, but there is a little bit of that question mark as to his attitude when things aren't going right.
Yeah, no, I did definitely notice that moment on the sidelines of him just looking dejected. The game's not even over. Um, yeah, I mean, it's everything about the start of this season has been, concerning. Like after week 4, we're like, oh yeah, we're amazing. And then now after week 6, it's like back to square one, it feels like. I do agree. I think there's something seeming to be about the leadership about this team that is not quite where it should be. And, maybe it'll come around in the season, but I think our defense has some good leaders on it, even despite all the injuries. You feel like they're really hanging together. They're not hanging their heads. They're playing hard. We got a mix now, a good mix of young guys and veterans, and they seem to motivate each other. Interesting to note, actually, that Ed Oliver played almost the entire game, which is a big surprise in this Bills era when they rotate like crazy. clearly they don't have a lot of trusted defensive tackles. Now that Daquan Jones is out, which is a bigger problem than I think people realize. Because you're having Ed Oliver play 90% of the snaps. I don't remember that ever happening for almost anyone over the last 4 years. So they're really, stretching him to the limit. The second defensive tackle was, I think, lower than 50%, which was Jordan Phillips. So that was interesting. But I still like the way our defense looked, even despite the injuries. Is their ceiling as high as when we had Trey White, Daquan Jones, and Matt Milano? Absolutely not. And is that a huge concern against, the better teams in the conference and in the league? Yeah, it's a massive concern. But our offense, there's something missing there. Again, Josh Allen doesn't seem to trust anyone that much beyond Stephon Diggs. He's targeting Davis very infrequently. Clearly, he's not getting open. He drops the ball too much. There's a lot of concerns with Gabe Davis. I don't think he's getting very much separation. A lot of the time when they show what Josh Allen is seeing, and you're like, well, Davis is not open. Our slot receiver is not open. I don't know if we're not being, multiple enough, really. We're being too predictable, and he has nowhere to go with the ball a lot of the time, so he's just giving Stephon Diggs a chance. But I do agree, Ken Dorsey really has to step his game up. I think we have players that you could involve. You see teams like Kansas City, their receivers are pretty lousy. And Mahomes is finding, 4 different receivers a game for multiple targets, because of the scheme is getting guys open. They're staying predictable. I don't think we're doing that enough. So whatever is the case, I think Allen needs to get back to being a more vocal and positive leader, because in the last few games, I think he has gone away from it, especially in the first half. He hasn't seemed engaged enough and ready to play from the first play of the game. There needs to be a sense of urgency, and it needs to start with Josh Allen.
And it's always funny because with Josh Allen, we flip-flop because we don't want him to be sugar high Josh, but we also don't want him to be mopey dopey Josh. And we need that in between. I don't think he's found it quite yet consistently. And that's probably Josh's biggest flaw when I look at him, because he's an incredible player. But there is a mental aspect to this game, which he's great at handling in cases where he's thrown picks and responding and continuing to throw the ball and not being afraid. And all those things are wonderful. But there is something more emotionally deep down that he does need to manage, because it's becoming quite apparent that he doesn't seem to be able to manage his emotions. He's either too high or too low. And we really need something more in between, a little more even keeled. And I'm not saying he's going to change who he is, but we do need to see some sort of consistency in his emotions. And we haven't seen that quite just yet. I'll end this part of the segment in a positive note, in that Dalton Kincaid wasn't there. And I'm very hopeful that, especially what we saw this week, which was, it was so obvious that our offense is truly one-dimensional. Maybe finally they're going to put some more presence and effort into getting Dalton Kincaid open and reducing Dawson Knox's share, because he's running too many routes in terms of the actual share split. They've almost split shares. They've split route running. Those things need to change. The snap counts need to change. We clearly need to see more from Dalton Kincaid, because that's our receiver that we drafted. I mean, I know he's a tight end, but realistically, we drafted him as a receiving option because we have a lack of weapons.
And
So
Knox
it's
can't
time.
catch.
Yeah, and Knox, of course, is, the hands are very questionable. We have Gabe Davis, who's continued his questionable receiving abilities. And you already said it. Josh, you can see, is hesitant to throw those guys open, to throw them open because he doesn't trust them. And that is something you can't have moving forward if you want to be an upper echelon, top tier offense. So the only way it's going to happen is if you get some other guys involved. I like what I've seen from Shakir. I've liked what I've seen from Hardy, and I've liked what I've seen from Kincaid, but they've all been so limited that it's hard to really judge what exactly they can do. And it's more surprising with a guy like Khalil Shakir because we could clearly see him emerging last season. And I feel like that's all being forgotten and he's being wasted. I think he's a very talented receiver. He's got great hands, he's got speed. He's that slot piece that I feel like we thought Isaiah McKenzie was going to be last year. And he could be that. So I would love to see us get some of those guys involved more. I'm very hopeful that when Dalton Kincaid comes back, we'll see more of that. To close out this episode, we're just going to spend a couple minutes talking about the keys to the game for this upcoming week. We left this really to the end this week because I don't believe there's a whole lot to talk about. And I hope I'm not going to be surprised. The Patriots are not a very good team. They're significantly worse than I anticipated. I think they're worse than most people thought they'd be just because they have Bill Belichick. They still are a well-coached team. I don't think anyone saw them being a bad team, a team that is going to win very few games this year. However, if the Bills come in and play the way they did, they are not going to beat Bill Belichick and the New England Patriots. So, Kev, what do the Bills need to do? Or more, probably it's going to be more of what do they need to do less of to win this game?
I mean, they just have to start on time. I think it's simple. Come out in the first quarter and put up points. We've seen the last few years, we almost always score in the first drive of the game. And the last two games, we've come out absolutely asleep. We have to come out with a proper game plan and have a nice mix of passing, and running where guys are schemed open. Don't laser in on just Diggs. I want to get Diggs involved, but don't focus on him at the expense of everyone else. And honestly, I think we should get Josh Allen running the ball again. I think when he's running and throwing, he's just a better player. He's more engaged in the game. He wants to get physical. I think the coaching staff is hammering to him that he shouldn't be doing that. And I frankly, I can't understand it. I understand they don't want him to get hurt, and they're concerned about his physical play. But at the same time, he needs that to be that competitive, amazing quarterback that we see. He's not a kind of guy who can just sort of lollygag his way and just throw his way into the game. He needs to get physically involved. That's the type of guy he is. That's the type of leader he is. He wants to get mixed. He wants to be in the mix. You saw him even try to get in that fight in the game. Like, he really wants to, and the coaching staff, I think, is holding him back. I want to see him get into this game and get into it early.
Yeah, you nailed it. The coaching staff, yes, they want to protect him, but I feel like they're trying to make a what is it, a round, something round fit in a square. I forget the phrase, but it's that, right? You're trying to put a square peg in a round hole. Is that what it is? So it's one of those things, you're asking a guy to just be someone else, and that's just not who he is. Again, you can tell him when you run, be a bit more careful, try to go to bounds, but don't tell him not to run. Don't tell him not to hurdle guys. You can't stop him from being Josh Allen. And clearly they have. I think it's actually gotten to him, and I don't think he's having fun. That's another thing. Yes, we talk about we want them to win. We want them to take it seriously. It's very important. They get paid a lot of money. Let's be honest. It's a game. It's entertainment. It's supposed to be fun. A little bit of fun is okay. And I don't think Josh Allen is having fun. Honestly, I don't think Stephon Diggs is having fun. We used to see these guys super excited and pumped up and, I'm him, like all that stuff. We've seen very little of that. And maybe part of that is just the team isn't rolling and things aren't going as smoothly as they've gone in the past. So the guys are feeling it a little bit. But I do agree. I feel like you nailed it. Josh needs to be Josh, and the coaching staff really needs to allow him to play. Let's just give quick game predictions. We got 30 seconds here. I think the Bills are going to come out huge, but I do think Belichick's defense is going to be a good defense. I'm going to go 24-10 for the Bills. I think the defense is going to be good.
I'll go a little different. I'll say 31-13. I think we'll have a breakout on offense. I think New England's terrible, and I think Mac Jones is pathetic. So 31-13.
All right. There you have it. Thank you for listening. Go Bills.